Rishi Sunak, the unelected Prime Minister of a near bankrupt European economy, says that China is the greatest danger to Britain, to Europe, and to its alliance. Greatest danger. We better tell them down at Hinckley Point, because the reality is the Chinese own 33.3% of our nuclear power plant, and indeed are involved in the construction of it. So we are allowing someone we regard as the greatest danger to us to own and help construct our nuclear plant. He also said that China was the greatest economic danger, which is a bit rich, even for Rishi, because our economy is on the floor. China's economy is booming. Perhaps that's what he meant. But is China responsible for the parlous state of the British economy? Of course not. If it was not for China, it would be very much worse. In fact, we'd sink below the waves. It is the British government and the British ruling elite, including its mediocrity, the mediaocracy, that is the echo chamber of the political elite, that are responsible for Britain's economic policies. In their response to the economic crash in 2008, in their decade-long austerity, in their hysterical overreaction to the COVID-19 pandemic, in their closing down of our society and our economy, and now in their self-harming frenzy of self-harming in relation to the sanctions against Russia and the billions that we are shipping out to Ukraine, when our own people are facing price increases in the shops of 25% and more. They say our inflation rate is 12%, but household food shopping is 25% up on the same period last week. Is that China's fault? Is making economic war against China going to solve that? And then, of course, there's the even more serious implied threat to China, that if China is the greatest threat to our security, well, we'll better do something about that. I don't know, send a gunboat up the Yangtze, although that didn't go so well back in 1949. Are we going to send our aircraft carriers held together by glue, only one of them, because the other one has broken down and is being cannibalized for parts? How are we going to face pardon me, how are we going to face this military threat that China represents? And does Rishi Sunak know that we have actually just joined a trading alliance of which China is the economically dominant partner? Are we going to explain around the conference table of the Pacific Partnership that we regard the main economy, the main country in that alliance to be Britain's gravest economic and military security danger? It is absolute madness. Discuss. And Joe Biden was on his feet. In fact, a series of calamities have accompanied Joe Biden's presence in Hiroshima. And I'll say more about Hiroshima in a minute. Joe Biden's presence there has been one disaster after another. First of all, in talking about the South Korean president, he called him President Loon. In talking to the Japanese Prime Minister, he called him the president. But Japan doesn't have a president. It has an emperor. You'd have thought a man of Joe Biden's age would know that. And the South Korean Prime Minister's name is not Loon. The last Prime Minister was Moon, and this Prime Minister has a name which doesn't sound anything like either Moon and definitely not loon. It is the lunatic asylum that Joe Biden is presiding over. But that was the least of his problems. He said that Russia had lost 100,000 dead soldiers in capturing Bakhmut, or Artemovsk, as it will henceforth be called, at least by me. He said the Russians lost 100,000, but they only had 20,000 fighting there to begin with, and they were not even Russian army soldiers. They were from a private military company, a PMC. A PMC largely comprising convicts that have been released from jail in return for their military service, has just beaten the combined might and armaments of NATO in Bakhmut, Artemovsk. Now, according to Zelensky, Artemovsk has not fallen and is still called Bakhmut. Joe Biden announced that it had fallen, but that the Russians had lost 100,000. 100,000 dead implies 300,000 casualties, at least, maybe 400,000. And yet, Wagner still had enough soldiers left over to capture all, according to the Russians, or most, according to the Americans, of a great industrial conurbation. That would seem to imply that they had at least 1 million soldiers in the field. But how can a private company have 1 million soldiers? It is complete lunacy. But that's what the president, the leader of NATO, actually said this week. Now, the G7 are wrapping it up in Hiroshima. We've made a video we'll show you in 20-30 minutes or so from now. I won't go over all the points that I made there, but isn't it the ultimate insult to the Japanese people to hold the G7 in Hiroshima when they are busily preparing what may very well lead to World War III and the exchange not of the fat boys of August of 1945, but the very slim and very fast and 1,000 times more powerful hypersonic nuclear weaponry that a World War III would automatically involve. Isn't that a bit rubbing it in for the people of Hiroshima, especially as the police were forced to club people down in the streets of Hiroshima and other Japanese cities for protesting, not only about the presence of these leaders in Hiroshima, but the absolute refusal of the President of the United States to apologize to the hundreds of thousands of civilians that were struck in Hiroshima by the world's first use of an atomic bomb. 80,000 people in Hiroshima died just like that in a flash, a very big, blinding flash. 80,000 people vaporized in a millisecond on the 6th of August 1945. But then the radiation began to seep into the water, into the food chain, into the bodies and the brains of the people of Hiroshima. 140,000 died as a result of one single bomb. And women in the labor wards of Hiroshima were still giving birth to mutilated children as a result of that radiation many decades after the Second World War had ended. But they were there. They're in Okinawa, clubbing people in Okinawa, a place that they have turned into a bordello, into a casino, into the site of organized US military crime. They have occupied Japan since 1945. They didn't allow Japan even to have a military, and yet now they are trying to press gang Japan into a military alliance to combat the threat of China. The rubric is China is becoming increasingly authoritarian at home and increasingly assertive abroad. But they never give any example of that assertiveness abroad. None, because there is none. China has one military base in the entire world outside of China. It's in Djibouti in Africa, alongside both an American and a Russian base. Djibouti is very lucky. It's got 3 foreign military bases. But the United States has more than 800 military bases around the world, increasingly around China. And as we now know, they've even got the biological weapons laboratories in Africa, in Sudan, in Ukraine, and no doubt in many, many other places. So what is this assertiveness that Rishi Sunak is determined to counter? And how is he going to counter it? These are the questions as the not so magnificent 7 winds itself up in Hiroshima tomorrow. We'll also be talking, of course, about Bakhmut and about what it means for the war. The truth is, it was in March a matter of the gravest strategic importance that the Russian takeover of Bakhmut was stopped. We know that because President Zelensky himself said so on CNN. They shall not pass, essentially, he said. If the Russians take Bakhmut, he said on CNN in March, 2 months ago, then the entire course of the war will be gravely and deleteriously affected. Now that it has fallen, now that according to the Wagner Group, every last Ukrainian soldier has been killed there because they take no prisoners in the circumstances in which this war has been fought. As soon as Wagner's troops began to be ritually executed when they fell into the hands of the Ukrainian armed forces, Wagner declared that they would no longer take prisoners. And they say that they shot the last escapee dressed as a woman. And now there is not a single live soldier left in Bakhmut. So is Bakhmut of great strategic importance, or is it of no importance at all? If you believe Zelensky, it was immensely important. If you believe Zelensky's choir in the Western media now, it's of no importance and no one can quite understand what all the fuss was about, why Russia tried so hard to capture it. And we'll be talking about Pakistan. In fact, our first guest is a Pakistani soldier, a retired major in the Pakistani army, now an analyst of note, a journalist, broadcaster, and commentator of note. Pakistan is turning fast into a torture chamber. Let me just give one example. A journalist called Imran Riaz Khan, as far as I know, no relation, has been kidnapped by the Pakistani intelligence ISI. There are many credible reports that he has been grievously tortured. Certainly many other prisoners, some of them now released, have testified the torture that they have suffered over these last few weeks of emergency, effectively martial law but undeclared in Pakistan, all because they are considered to be, or actually are, supporters of the Imran Khan, in my view, the rightful Prime Minister of Pakistan. The arrest of at least 7,000, including the entire leadership of the Pakistan Tehreek-e Insaf PTI, the party that was the governing party until the American-inspired coup d'etat over a year ago, 7,000 of them have been taken prisoner. And Imran Khan himself says that he expects to be arrested again in Islamabad when he attends court tomorrow. In my view, and I have oft expressed it, if Imran Khan disappears into the dungeons of the injustice system that currently prevails in Pakistan, we may very well never see him again. Because the crooks that now run Pakistan can no longer afford for Imran Khan to remain a thing, a political thing, a player in the upcoming, unavoidable presidential parliamentary elections in Pakistan just a few months hence. And therefore, the incentive for them or someone acting on their behalf to dispose of this turbulent priest will, I fear, prove overwhelming. So much agreed by so many pundits. But I alone, I think, it seems, in the English-speaking punditocracy, posit this, that if Imran Khan is murdered, as so many Pakistani leaders, some of them very close friends of mine, have been murdered before, Pakistan will quickly become uncontrollable. More than 200 million people and millions scattered around the world in the Pakistan diaspora, including millions of them in Britain, will be uncontrollable. A wave of uncontrollable violence will be unleashed in Pakistan, which, given that Pakistan is a nuclear-armed state, bordering some of the biggest powder kegs in geopolitics today, a grave threat to international security will arise. If that's not enough to make the British government, the American government, signal to their satrapies in power in Islamabad, don't touch a hair on the head of Imran Khan, because we will not be able to rescue the situation that will then ensue. I don't know really what would be. Maybe our first guest will be able to enlighten us. It's going to be, as I said, a bumpy ride, so better fasten your seatbelts. It's the mother of all talk shows.